Hello noble ones, welcome back to my channel. This is the Metatron speaking, and today we'll try to better understand the crucifixion within its historical, legal and clinical context as a form of torture and execution in the ancient world. Now the topic is extremely wide, so in order to turn it into a coherent thesis and hypothesis, I'll divide it into three subsections. History of crucifixion. On this section we'll talk about how the ancient Romans learned and perfected crucifixion and what sort of crimes turned you into a crucifiable criminal from a Roman legal standpoint. Section 2. Was Jesus actually crucified? On this section we'll discuss whether or not a cross was used to crucify Jesus. We'll do that by reviewing several non-Christian documents in Latin, which I'll read and translate for you. Section 3. The clinical effects. On the last section we'll talk about what the nails on your hands, wrists and feet do in terms of tissue damage, and what the overall position on the cross does to the human body from a medical standpoint. For the third section, viewer discretion is advised. As always, on this channel we'll seek the answers within the boundaries of historical facts, trying to be as unbiased as possible. We will mention the Republican era, but most of the video will shift in focus to a Roman imperial context. In the classical period, three forms of capital punishments were considered to be the worst possible. Crux, crucifixion; crematio, burning; decollatio, decapitation, in that order. To the Romans in particular, crucifixion was a shameful way to die, so much so that according to Cicero, it was inappropriate for a Roman citizen to be confronted with the very word cross. In his own words, but liability to them, the expectation, nay, the mere mention of them, that is unworthy of a Roman citizen and a free man. The crucifixion probably originated with the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and it was used systematically by the Persians in the 6th century BC. Alexander the Great brought it from there to the eastern Mediterranean countries, all of that happening in the 4th century BC, with his successors introducing it to Egypt, Syria, Phoenicia and Carthage. The Romans learned the technique during the Punic Wars, and then they perfected it over 500 years, becoming the major utilizers of this form of punishment, which will then be abolished in the 4th century AD by Emperor Constantine I. For a three-dimensional context, it is also important to note that crucifixion was sometimes used against Roman legionaries and Roman tax collectors too, such as by Arminius after he had defeated Varus' troops, and by Boudica during their revolt in Britain, AD 59-61. To further contextualize this, crucifixion at the time of Christ was accepted in Jewish law as a form of punishment together with stoning and strangling, and it was considered by culture a shameful way to die, a curse from God, Deuteronomy 21:23. Crucifixion was a commonplace in Palestine under Roman rule, Varus crucifying 2,000 Jews in 4 BC, while Josephus reported mass crucifixion during the Jewish wars. Now, could you be crucified if you were a Roman citizen? Well, Roman citizenship brought a relative measure of protection from crucifixion, although this was not always the case. It was not absolute. Even though it was a rare event, Roman citizens could be crucified too, and Emperor Adrianus is one of those emperors that did that. In the specific case of Palestine, however, the Romans were more concerned with subjugating political dissent, so one of the most common causes of crucifixion was removing politically motivated rebels, rather than punishing locally ordinary criminality. Also, crucifixion was always done publicly, so that it could be an example for others, and this explains why they chose the Golgotha. The Golgotha was a hill right outside of Jerusalem, in a place near the entrance of the city, so that everybody could see. Golgotha meaning the skull. Three possible explanations for this. Either geographically that hill had a shape resembling a skull, or the place was near a Jewish cemetery, or it was littered with skeletal remains of executed victims. Leaving dead bodies out in the open was against Jewish law, but it was not against Roman law. There were a wide range of offences that were punishable by crucifixion according to Roman law. During times of peace, those who inflicted the penalty acted within the constraints of the rule of law, together with the pressure of the political circumstances. During wartime, crucifixion could be used and was used en masse, sometimes in a particularly brutal way. Look at Spartacus's rebellion. 6,000 survivors of the revolt, captured by the legions of Crassus, were crucified, lining the Appian Way, from Rome to Capua. Now let me show you what that actually means on a map of Italy. The Appian Way is one of the earliest and strategically most important Roman roads of the ancient Republic. It connected Rome to Brundisium, modern-day Brindisi, in southeast Italy. If you were to take the Appian Road to make your way from Rome to Capua after the revolt had finished, the entirety of the sides of the road would have been completely filled with crucified men, all the way until the horizon. It sounds like a description of a section of hell, but it really happened. In Roman orderings of crucifixion during peacetime, however, the situation was different. Consideration was usually given to culpability, and a basic hearing was often given. So what were the crimes? Banditry, murder, treason and sedition, defamation of the emperor, military desertion and cowardice, rebellion, provincial resistance and revolt, civil war, membership in a despised religious group. Within the Roman world, banditry generally has to do with either murder or kidnapping. Bandits are also named in Latin latrones, which is different from the common thieves, praedones. So you would be considered a bandit depending on the violence of your crimes, including murder, the magnitude of your robberies, and the gathering of a band around you. Latrones might also include people who committed other kinds of crimes, such as receiving stolen goods, evading sentences, aiding and abetting. Provincial governors were thus ordered to hunt bandits down for the sake of public order and crucify them. You would be considered a murderer and therefore punishable by crucifixion, not only in the case of you murdering someone, but also in you taking part within a plot to murder someone. Treason and sedition are relatively similar, but in general can be understood as crimes against the people and state of Rome. It would probably take half of this video to list just the number of crimes that were considered part of this category. And as we reach the Principate, even more crimes are added. And by the times of Augustus, defamatory speech or anything written against the imperial family would be considered treason, and therefore to the cross we go. The fact that the Roman military was particularly strict and severe is no secret. Everyone knows about the decimation, for example. But in order to prevent the breakdown of military unity, desertion could be crucifiable. A very famous occurrence of this specific situation happened with Scipio Africanus after he had defeated Carthage. Among all of his prisoners, Scipio Africanus found some Roman deserters, and these were treated harshly. He had them all crucified. Quite a big chunk of Roman economy during the Republic and the Empire was based on the slaves, and therefore these masses of slaves, although they were a good source of income and workforce, they were also a danger to the authority and stability of the empire. Crucifixion was an effective means of holding in check any possible occurrence of defiance by this underclass. When it comes to the persecution of specific religious groups, of course, the persecution of the Christians by Emperor Nero is probably the most famous, but not the only one. We also have the persecution of the Jews in Alexandria in 38 AD, and Tiberius's crucifixion of the priests of Isis. Slaves could also be crucified at the desire of their master, and in fact, it was one of the most common ways to punish a slave when his crimes were culpable enough to sentence him to death. Crucifixion was used by the Romans very effectively and systematically during their attacks and conquering wars in Palestine. A very famous occurrence of this was Titus's siege of Jerusalem, whereby any person who would go out even simply for foraging food would be crucified. Historically, in Rome and Judea, there was a man by the name of Yeshua who was crucified. Oftentimes, particularly in religious art, we have this representation of Jesus of Nazareth carrying his own cross, the whole cross. Now, those pictures are historically incorrect. The crux, the cross, was never carried. What was carried as a form of punishment by those who were going to be crucified was the so-called patibulum. As one has a general survey of ancient Roman sources in Latin describing what a patibulum was and how it was carried and how it was linked to the practice of crucifixion, one will eventually come in contact with these 5 descriptions in Latin. These descriptions use the Latin term patibulum in combination with verbs of the semantic domain carry, bear. Patibulum ferat per urbem, deinde affigatur, cruci. Let him carry the patibulum throughout the city. Let him thereafter be fastened to the cross. The overall mood of this text in Latin is subjunctive, and it expresses that a certain person should carry a patibulum throughout the city, thereupon he needs to be fixed on the crux. So the crux in this case is probably representing an upright pole, while the patibulum is something that the person who's going to be crucified is carrying, and then, probably with the patibulum still on him, he was attached on a cross. Quid aesti, Sceledre, hancrem gero habeo auris, loquere qui divis, credo ego istoc exemplo tibi esse, pereundum extra portam, dispessis manibus patibulum quam habebis. What do you say, Sceledrus? I have this job, I have ears, speak what you will. You'll soon have to trudge out beyond the gate with outspread arms in that attitude, I take it, when you will have the patibulum. With this description, we understand that this patibulum most likely had a horizontal shape, because it describes specifically the fact that the arms were stretched, outspread. O carnuficium cribrum, quod credo fore, ita te forabunt, patibulatum per vias stimulis, carnufices, huc si reveniat senex. Oh, riddle the executioner. I guess it will be thus when the executioner will bore you with goads, patibulated, through the streets when the old man comes back here. This is an interesting one, but it kind of, again, reinforces this idea that the patibulum was attached somehow to the person who was going to be punished. Patibulated, it's kind of a rare event, but in this case does give that idea. Diligat ad patibulos, de ligantur et circumferuntur, cruci de figuntur. Fastened to a patibulum. They are fastened and led around and then nailed to the cross. Here we have the first mention that I could find when it comes to the method in which people were fastened, the nails. Now in the third section of this video we will see exactly how most likely those nails were used and what they actually did to the human body. In here we have just affirmed that the ancient Romans do speak about the nails even when referring to crucifixion in general, so other people being crucified. Si vero cum his Saturnus fuerit inventus, ipse nobis exitium mortis ostendit, nam in istis facinoribus de prehensus severa animadvertensis, sententia patibulo subfixus in crucem tollitur. But if Saturn is found in conjunction with these, it shows us a deadly fate, for he who is detected in such crimes is punished with a severe sentence. Fastened to the patibulum, he is raised on a cross. And again, in this passage, we have a better detailed and more deeply described situation whereby we understand that the person is first fastened to the patibulum and then he's raised and attached to the rest of the cross. Latin literature supports the idea of a cross. Now we don't know if it's a T-looking cross or if it's this kind of cross. No one knows what it looked like exactly. The crux simplex existed. Sometimes the Romans did use just a single pole, but we do see that in the majority of cases, whenever we have reference for it, they do specifically say that a person who is attached to a horizontal patibulum is then raised on the stake. So I believe it is more sensible to go with the traditional idea of either this kind of cross or this, because that's what the non-Christian ancient Roman literature describes. Another interesting piece of information is the fact that the Roman legionaries who were assigned to crucify people could not leave the area of the crucifixion until the victim had died. That is one of the reasons why they were known for trying to precipitate said death either by breaking the legs or spearing the victim through the heart. A little less commonly known, another practice that they did was to burn a fire just underneath the cross so that the victim would asphyxiate. All of these facts that have to do with crucifixion in the ancient Roman world are important because they can be networked with other aspects of the life of Jesus of Nazareth to enhance the historical probabilities that must be brought into play in order for us to understand why, from a legal standpoint, he was crucified. It is extremely important to understand the boundaries of historical reality within which a given historical figure must have operated. They will help us place said figure and his punishment in a realistic context. Would the ancient Romans have crucified an innocuous teacher who was just spreading peace and love around Roman Judea? Most likely no. And that's why having the proper legal basis of understanding of what was going on from an ancient Roman legal perspective gives Jesus' trial and execution a hermeneutical bearing on precisely what it was that he taught and did, given sometimes victims of circumstance also happened and were crucified. I'm not saying that we know for sure that what Jesus was doing was perceived to be dangerous from the Roman authorities. All I'm saying is that most likely there still is a lot we don't know about what happened exactly. One of the clues we have is also what they wrote on the cross. It is reported, and most people know, that we have the inscription "Inri," which means Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. It was written in Hebrew, Greek and Latin. That wasn't only the case with Jesus' cross. In fact, it was a practice, again, within Roman law, to write the crime on top of the cross that led that specific person to be crucified, so that everybody would know. So that inscription could serve as the connecting link between Jesus' crucifixion and the cause for which Judean leaders and high priests handed him over to the Roman authorities. But unless he had a program of resistance against the imperial order, that title doesn't pose a threat to Rome. Was then the governor, Pontius Pilatus, pushed by the local Jews to crucify Jesus even if he didn't find him culpable enough? That is also a possible reading of this. Let's keep an open mind for all possibilities. Death would usually occur between 6 hours to 4 days, and it was due to a multifactorial pathology. The most important factor was progressive asphyxia, caused by the impairment of respiratory movement. The resultant anoxemia exaggerated hypovolemic shock. Respiratory and cardiovascular failure were two of the most common causes of death in crucified individuals, with the most likely cause of death being asphyxiation. One of the main problems caused to the body by the position in which a person is put as he's being crucified is the fact that breathing requires more and more effort as the muscles become exhausted. The arms being outstretched, the knees bent, and the trunk sagged forward. All of these aspects put together placed an enormous tension to the pectoral muscles, which pulled the chest wall upward and outward, while at the same time having the individual's entire weight on their wrist and hands. All of this drastically increased the work necessary for expiration. As time went on, both capacity and expiratory reserve volumes decreased, while the victim would develop functional respiratory acidosis. In simpler terms, in order to be able to breathe, the victim had to push his entire body upward. All of this through his nail-impaired upper limbs. This position, even in the strongest and healthiest of victims, would have, with time and days passing, set in multiple organ failure. Lactic acid would accumulate, expediting systemic decompensation. Breathing, with the arms fully extended, would have been purely diaphragmatic. With blood pressure halved, tidal volume decreased by 70%, and pulse pressure doubled. You will recall that in the account of the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth, he gets very thirsty and asks for water. Extreme dehydration is one of the characteristics of this form of punishment. This would lead to the depletion of intercellular and extracellular volume. But how easily could you force nails or spikes through the human hand, wrist and feet, and what damage would they deal? Spikes could easily go through human tissue. Possibly 1 or 2 hammer strikes would drive the spikes completely through, and when it came to the feet, probably 3 strikes would be necessary. By placing the nails in the exact center of the hands and wrist, you probably wouldn't transect any major nerve or artery. Although, depending on how this was done, some nerves could be torn and some structures could be compressed. For the hand, this would include the digital branches of the median nerve and branches of the superficial palmar arch. Still, assuming a perfectly centered position, no flexor tendon would be severed. Also, no metacarpal bones would be fractured by the spikes, which would most likely take a path between adjacent bones, meaning the 3rd and 4th metacarpal bones. However, when it comes to the wrist, both the flexor and extensor retinacula would be pierced. In order to expedite death, as we have said, executioners could use a hammer to fracture the tibia and fibula, causing and expediting death because of internal bleeding and hastened respiratory depression. Alright, noble ones, well, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember thumbs up, and if you're not yet members of this community, become a noble one. Subscribe to my channel for more content from the Metatron. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and thank you very much for watching. And remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.